Well, good morning. I'm Tim Sheehy, President of the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to the Business of Metro Milwaukee. This monthly webinar puts a spotlight on the challenges and opportunities we face in sustaining and growing the region's prosperity. We hope these insights will help shape your business and inspire you to help shape the region's future. As we emerge from COVID-19 and businesses begin working to safely re-engage their employees in the office, many after working remotely for more than a year, we're going to discuss some of the findings of a recent survey from Metro Milwaukee employers. And we're also going to hear from an industry HR leader and a legal expert on the human resource and personnel issues that you need to address as folks come back to work. So joining us today are Irina Boudreau, Human Resources Vice President for Eaton Power Systems, and Mark Goldstein, President of Goldstein Law Group. And following our discussion with Mark and Irina, we're going to be joined again around 11:30 or so by Dr. John Raymond, President of the Medical College of Wisconsin, for his perspective on reopening offices, plus an update on the latest information surrounding the vaccine rollout. But first, as they say, a word from our sponsor. Today's sponsor is United Healthcare. United Healthcare is partnered with MMAC to make it easier for employers with 5 to 99 employees to find a health plan that works for your employees and your bottom line. That's why when you work with an MMAC affiliated broker, you'll receive discounted rates on United Healthcare's All Savers health plans. Plus, you'll have the option to add another United Healthcare plan to your employee benefits package. So contact your MMAC broker or visit MMAC.org to learn more. Also, the biggest issue we hear from our membership is finding and filling the job openings they have as they rebound from COVID. So to help in this effort, MMAC's next step is a new online resource portal to connect employers to experts and information to help address your talent challenges. The Talent Solutions Directory provides a curated database of service providers to help you find and connect with the resources you need most. As part of the build out, we're identifying service providers who are interested in promoting their solutions to thousands of business leaders. See our website for additional details. So now let's jump into today's discussion. And Irina and Mark, I want to thank you both for being with us. Irina, I want to start with you. And just if you would, tell us a little bit about your business and some of the challenges that you have coming out of the pandemic, not just coming back, kind of to work in the office, but also as you try to fill some of the open positions you have at Eaton Power.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tim, very much for having me over for this discussion today. Really appreciate that. So I'll do a quick intro and then I'm happy to share my perspective. So I work for Eaton Corporation and I have been with the company for 14 years now. I've moved around a little bit across. It's a global company here in the Milwaukee area. I moved about 2 years ago now. And in Milwaukee area, we've got about 2,000 employees in about 8 locations. So fairly large employer here in the Milwaukee area. And what I'd say a pretty good, steady business. Thinking about and reflecting on the question on the pandemic, right? So certainly has been a very challenging year, and especially as I think about last year, we are coming back for sure this year, but the recovery is still pretty slow. If I think about specifically challenges with labor, I'd say last year we've seen a pretty slow movement in terms of people. People, I think, are hanging on to their jobs, right? There wasn't a whole lot of movement. But as we're seeing this year unfold, certainly turnover rates have been increasing. And also we're seeing a very dynamic labor market this year. Lots of companies being very creative about the way they go about wages, the way they go about recruiting efforts. So certainly the competition is getting to be a little bit more tighter this year, and the talent war, how I call it, is real. Certainly one other challenge that we're seeing is kind of a combination of unemployment benefits, the stimulus, and this is that time of year where we see a lot of money coming from the tax breaks, right? With the tax filings being the deadline being right around the corner here. So combination of all these factors are making it attractive for workers, right, to enjoy those benefits. So that causes a little bit of a challenge for us as an employer to think about how do we motivate them, right, and how do we encourage them, incentivize them to come work for us. I'd say, you know, the teams have been pretty creative about a variety of different recruiting efforts. If that's a COVID-friendly event from the recruiting standpoint, which is like a drive-up event, or, you know, online virtual recruiting events with a variety of different vendors and partners that we haven't done before. So trying to kind of think about creative ways we can do to go out there and tap into that labor market, but it's certainly been a challenge so far this year.
Irina, do you think you're approaching this differently than other employers from the perspective of being a manufacturer, where you really couldn't send everybody home to work remotely? And does that impact how you think about the office work at Eaton, where you have people on the plant floor working? Has that changed your perception in terms of how you've treated the office through the COVID process?
Well, I'd certainly say for the production on the operations teams, they've been, you know, resiliently working through the pandemic, right, last year and this year, and just a tremendous level of appreciation for everything they've done right through these challenging times to really be committed and be loyal to continue to manufacture products for us. And types of products that we make here at Eaton are related to power, and they're business essentials because we, you know, in order for us to have this call today, we have a need for power. And some of the products that they make is related to making sure that we have consistently power. So that's one piece. So certainly, you know, that piece of our workforce or the operations teams have been resiliently working through these. On the salaried side, I'd say we, like I'm sure everybody else on the call, encourage people to work from home where they can, right? And a lot of our salaried employees have taken advantage of this and have been working from home for the last, year and a half now. And as we're thinking about, you know, do we treat them differently? No, but there's a lot of learnings that come from it, right? Kind of thinking through that stereotype of what does it mean to work from home, and is it better or worse, right? And we're seeing, you know, tremendous results from working from home. So I think it's kind of shifting that paradigm of is that something that we want to look at going forward, right? Or is it maybe a hybrid approach where we might kind of look at, you know, return to work and maybe some sort of like hybrid days in the office, right? And certainly these are just, you know, some ideas we're tossing around, but not quite ready, quite frankly, yet to pull the trigger on the return to work for salaried employees. We are a global company and we're thinking about the dynamics that are happening in the world, right? So we're lucky in the US that we do have the vaccine, and there's a huge campaign around encouragement for vaccination, which is fantastic. But just reflecting on what's going on right now in India, for example, right? And we have lost, unfortunately, several of our own colleagues at Eaton on our India team. So that's just very, very heartbreaking. And just as a reminder, right, that it still exists, it's there, it's dangerous, and we're just going to have to keep the pulse on those. Brazil is another example, right? It's just developing as we speak, right? And kind of following the patterns of India at the moment. So again, just thinking about when are we ready for return to work, right? And at this point, we're taking a cautious approach because there's hot spots still across the world that we just have to be mindful of.
Yeah, Mark, as we kind of survey our members and look at employers here, there seemed to be a consensus, and Irina alluded to it, that companies over the summer are going to ramp up, but they're really looking at Labor Day as a return to work. And some of the concerns that employers have is building confidence in their employees that the workplace is now safe to come back to, that a majority of their peers have been vaccinated. So what is it that employers need to think about as we get closer to Labor Day and what seems to be like a demarcation point for the return to office?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And again, great to be with you. And I appreciate the opportunity because it allows me to think a little bit about what I've been thinking about and all the various experiences we've been taking in. I kind of created this analogy in this first slide that I have of almost like a gaper's block. And what's funny about it is that it feels like, you mentioned Labor Day, it feels like it's actually much sooner. And it feels like in the past 2 or 3 weeks, it's really accelerated. I remember last year around this time when there was a moderate return to work order, and all of a sudden people were kind of scrambling. What do we do? How do we do? And I feel like we're going through that same kind of sensation right now about returning to some semblance of normal. You mentioned 2 things. What can employers do about the workplace being safe and about interacting with peers? And I think one of the challenges there is that every individual has their own sense of that. Employers are not guarantors of that. We know a whole lot more today than we did a year ago about the virus and about everything about it. And we also have a vaccine, 3 vaccines actually, maybe 4, that are at play. So the circumstances are much different. But I think that it relates entirely to what kind of workplace are we talking about? Are we talking about restaurants, bars, professional services, or manufacturing, or other? And it also relates to this other dimension, which is a lot more complicated, and Irina talked about it. And that is the sentiments of individuals and employees about where they're at in their own mindset about returning to work. Now, it might be monetary, and we talked about that a moment ago, but it also might be about a whole variety of things. You know, on the one hand, it could be, I just got a COVID puppy and I wasn't planning on returning to work yet because I've got training and I'm enjoying that time at home, or I haven't arranged for childcare for the summer, or I've got my vaccine, but I haven't finished my 2 weeks yet. So there's a whole range of considerations, and it could also be just generalized anxiety. So I think the punchline to all this is that we come back to the basics from a legal standpoint. You know, hand washing, mask wearing, social distancing, and then of course the question about the vaccine. And 2 of them are very easy. Hand washing, there's no reason that shouldn't continue, right? And the vaccine, we can talk about the complexities around it, but fundamentally, it's now available to everyone. I think where we really have the challenge is social distancing and with respect to mask wearing. And that's where there's some tension around what should we be doing and who should we be appealing to, whether it's certain employees, whether it's a directive from management, and so on.
Yeah, Irina and Mark, let me both ask you the same question from your different perspectives. And that is, again, looking at the survey, I think 100% of the people that responded to the survey don't see going back to a 5-day-a-week, 8 to 5 work schedule, that they see this hybridization continuing. So Irina, how do you think about that from the perspective of just kind of managing teams? And then Mark, are there legal issues associated with this as we kind of embed this hybridization of working from home, well, for some, while others are working in an office? So Irina, I'll start with you, and then Mark, from your perspective.
Yeah, sure, Tim. That's a really good question, and it's been on I know on minds of our employees quite a bit because they've been asking that question, right? So just to think about that, we would go back to what used to be a year and a half ago, almost now, right? It's probably a little bit, what I'd say, naive, right? It's changed the way we, the whole paradigm of how we think about work has changed, and I could probably say that this is likely going to be the most perhaps meaningful or impactful COVID legacy that we'll see from the workforce standpoint. And as employers, really, we want to be thinking about what does it mean to our workforce, right? Because it could cause some engagement items, right, or concerns. It can cause some retention issues if we're not flexible enough. If I kind of think loud about it, I do think that hybrid approach, it'll probably be a combination of both, right? It will be a combination of remote work where possible, combination of co-hours in the office where that's possible, and it's kind of a hybrid of these two. Now, what does that exactly look like? I think that's going to be depending on the industry, depending on the team, depending on the function. But some sort of variation of that likely is going to, take shape over the next even few years, right, as we think about it. And, the more flexible we are in our thinking of what that looks like, I think the greater chances we will have on retention, and again, keeping employees engaged in the process, right? And as we recover from this. So I'd see that line of thought as we think forward. Exactly kind of what that would shape up to be depends very much on, again, the teams and the function, but I think a hybrid approach would be something that we would be seeing.
Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, so you asked me about some legal considerations. So I think there are really two that jump to mind. One is the question about to what extent can we require this? And the short answer is you can. It's best to have reasons and be able to articulate those reasons, but you certainly can require that, hey, we're back to work as of Memorial Day, or we're back to work as of July 1st, or whatever it might be. The place where it gets a little complicated is that we walk ourselves into this almost a counterintuitive trap. The people that cannot come back or don't want to come back, it might be because I'm not vaccinated. It might be because I don't want to. It might be because I have childcare obligations. None of those really relate to the employer's needs and the employer's requirements. And then we get into what Irina talked about, the difference between manufacturing and front office, right? And the requirements of those kinds of positions. So I think the short answer is employers can require it. Many will and should. I think one of the best ways to talk about this is, how do we measure productivity, and how do we answer that question about I'm more productive at home? And do we have an answer to that, to say you're not, or statistically we haven't found that people are more productive at home, or that there are other things about being in the workplace and that counteract that? One other point I just want to be clear about, and that is when we talk about hybrid, there are at least two different kinds of hybrid. One is to say that that everyone works at the office 3 out of 5 days or 4 out of 5 days. Or the other would be to actually designate those days, and scheduling and the opportunities for people to interact and to actually advance the work becomes really challenging if everyone's picking their own days and making their own schedules.
Yeah. Irina, how do you see this unfolding when you just look at it from Eaton's perspective? And again, just looking at some of the feedback, one of the concerns that folks have is, working out of the office means that you're always on, that you run the risk of burnout. There's a challenge just in mentoring when people are in and out of the office and bringing on new hires. So how do you think about that from Eaton's perspective as we kind of step forward into this bold new world where more flexibility creates more challenges for the employers as well as some opportunity? Right.
So not an easy question to answer, right? That's where it will require us to really be creative, but also be flexible. Certainly certain parameters and certain criteria will have to be used, right, to be able to manage this process going forward. And I would say, managers got to be super open to that idea as well, right? Kind of what does it work for my team, and what does that mean for the teams that I'm working with on a different function, for example? When can they commingle and interact together? The whole issue of the burnout, it's real, right? It's happening, and you see it all the time. And you talk to these folks who work from home 100% now, and they'll tell you, right, one more email, and you look at the clock and it's 7:00 p.m., right? And I didn't get a chance even to think about needing to eat dinner, or finding myself on cell phone, on IM, on email all the time, even if I'm having dinner, right? So really kind of encouraging folks to think about what are the boundaries that work for you. The different people think of it differently and react to it differently, but are there certain boundaries that you want to put to yourselves? And I, speaking from personal experience, I've tried different things myself as well as I'm working from home, certain days of the week. And I'll say it's hard to disconnect. It is really hard to disconnect. But what I found myself, if I force myself to say, well, between 6 and 7, it is my dinner time with my family. So I am not going to take a look at my phone. I'm not going to take a look at my computer. I'm just going to completely disconnect for a full hour to spend time with my family. And I have 2 little kids, so as you can imagine, it's a busy time at our our house at the evening time. The other piece is also physical activity, right? We're seeing, this commitment to staying connected so much that the more we make available training classes, options for people, incentives for them to go out there and do some physical activity, the better they are. And they'll tell you they feel it, but kind of disconnecting and finding that moment to what works for me and how can I make it work for me, right? That's another big deal. And I think a lot of folks also will share that those a process of learning themselves in this whole year and a half, right? What does it mean, stress for me, and how can I deal with it personally at the personal level? It means very different things for very different people. So kind of adjusting to that and making sure that you kind of identify one. We talk a lot about passion, following your passion, and right? So, if you find 1 or 2 activities that brings you joy as you're dealing with, and just an overwhelming amount of activities at work and at home, follow that path. And you can find kind of that way of finding that joy and the satisfaction and things that you do, and that helps you deal with the burnout. But it's real. It means different things for different people. So it's certainly a challenge as we go forward. It's not going to get better either, right? Because we're now going to add up the complexity of that hybrid potential schedule, what that would look like. So I think that will even add some more anxiety, right? So how can I make it work, and what does it mean to me? So certainly more work to do there.
Yeah. Mark, another one of the feedbacks we got from the survey was that, vaccination status is not going to be a limiting factor on returning to work. And that, most employers at this point are not requiring a vaccination. They're going on the honor system. But, part of encouraging people to come back to the office is, look, we've got 80% or 90% of the office vaccinated, so it's a safer environment. So what are the issues hypothetically if I'm an employer and I say, look, the office is open on, after Labor Day, we want you back. We're not requiring a vaccination. We think most people have been vaccinated. And now I run into issues of people saying, well, I'm not sure I feel safe if everybody isn't vaccinated. So what are the legal issues now, or the implications for employers in a scenario like that?
Yeah, well, the implications, I think, are more than the legal issues, because I don't know that the legal issues are as big as they were a year ago. In other words, employer exposure for that is not really from a legal standpoint. I mean, there might be a few small issues related to workers' comp or whatnot, but the state legislature has acted on that. And so it's really about the implications of if someone were to get sick and they're not working, or employee anxiety. And I think we're really back to some of the things we've been talking about this half hour. From a demographic standpoint, the number of employees is lesser. The people that have been with us through this have been with us through this, and it'll take a fair amount of energy to find replacements. So we can't appeal to everyone, and we can't satisfy everyone. We have to lead a little bit from a point of strength and confidence that this is what we're doing and it's sufficient. But at the same time, we have to be open to reasonable suggestions that I have anxiety, I'm weary. There are folks who are dealing with PTSD or grief or whatever it might be. So to me, it's giving the time and space to allow those conversations to happen. And if I may, there's one example of this I heard about recently that I just thought was terrific. So I wanted to share it with you. It's the idea of bringing people together and setting up what's called a COVID museum. And that is giving everyone a group of prompts and just asking them to fill out Post-its that answer questions like people that supported you and how during the pandemic, actions that you took that you wish to continue, some of the things you've overcome, what worked during the pandemic you're most proud of. And this hopefully will give folks a chance to kind of deal with that stuff and bring it together in a positive way. So I think we have to recognize it and acknowledge it. But fundamentally, I think a strong lead to say, this is what we're doing, it's enough, and we're confident that we know the way forward. And again, it's, hand washing is an easy one. Social distancing, we've kind of mastered. It's the mask wearing and vaccination become little points of tussle.
Yeah. So Irina and Mark, I'm looking for easy questions in the Q&A, and there aren't any. So Irina, this is a really interesting question from one of our listeners. If each employee is encouraged to erect their own boundaries to protect their personal lives, won't these boundaries conflict with each other and thus cause decreased productivity just because of the inability of people to collaborate? So how do you work through where you need to collaborate and where you put up these boundaries?
Yeah, it's like I said, it's one that it won't be an answer for every scenario. I think it will be very much tailored to what the team is trying to accomplish and what area industry the team works in. But again, just think about a year and a half ago, we all, and I kind of think through the leaders at Eaton, I mean, there was a very degree of embracing the remote work, right? Just think about, you had your team. I mean, just the idea of everybody working from home at that point, which was a year and a half ago, was absolutely, oh gosh, that just can't exist. I can't make it work. But we went through this, and we went through this not because we necessarily wanted to, but we learned so many things from it, right? And one of them is that it's possible, right? So I think we got to just keep open our flexibility and think about how can we make it work. Really, the choice is going to be either we can't make it work and we require everybody to come back and we're strict in these requirements. And I think at that point, we might see some fallouts is what I call it, right? So again, issues with turnover, some issues with engagement, or we can have a phased approach and maybe more flexible approach on how do we work with our employees to make sure that they come back safely. One way to think about it, open up to volunteers at first, right? It's a phased approach. You might put a cap on it at first and see how many you get. The second phase, you might also open up to volunteers, but raise up the cap and see maybe you get a larger group of people wanting to. And that way you can kind of gauge on how much how complex is the issue of coming back, because there's some people who are going to raise their hand and said, you know what, I'm an extrovert and I just want to come back to work because I can't do it anymore, right? And we've got that group of folks. Or, someone who was just a little bit more careful about, hey, I just can't afford to get exposed, because of a medical condition or someone that I'm taking care of for, and I'm not able to do that in the first few phases. So I'm really going to be flexible in thinking about how do we come back and how do we make the teams more flexible to work with these kinds of schedules. Will you have conflict? Of course you will. You always will, right? And again, it's just part of the process. What do we call it? Dealing with ambiguity a little bit, right? Had it been black and white, it's easier to manage and it's easier to have a straightforward answer. But here's where we're going to just have a little bit more patience and more flexibility in the way we're thinking about these.
Yeah, a number of employers have. The question is, has Eaton done any internal campaigns around vaccines or offered clinics at the workplace?
Yeah, very good question, Tim. So the answer is yes. We have done on-site vaccination clinics here actually a couple of weeks ago, and one happened yesterday in our South Milwaukee facility as well. I'm happy to share that employees have taken advantage of the on-site vaccination, so that's great to hear. We've been really trying to encourage employees to get vaccinated, and this is through education, this is through communication, posters, emails, teaching our leaders and how to approach these discussions. One thing that I would caution about is requiring vaccines, right? So vaccination is still considered a private piece of information, and Mark probably can speak a little bit more on this too. So requiring vaccines, again, that's a personal choice of what a company decides to do, but that's something that Eaton has not done. And again, because of the privacy issue that you have there in the middle, and you get employees all the time who say, hey, let's do a campaign and give people t-shirts about, I'm vaccinated, and maybe that could stimulate a little bit more engagement. But again, because it's a privacy issue, we're trying to be a little more mindful of how do we mandate this, and we're not mandating it. We're not asking people to self-disclose on our system at this point, and just going through education and educating leaders, communication as well.
Any thoughts on that from a legal perspective, Mark?
Yeah, so I want to be very clear about it. Irina put it very well, that there are a whole bunch of considerations around this, but from a legal standpoint, you can ask, you can require. It's up to you as to whether you want to do that. But it gets back to what you said, Tim, which is the employer cannot and should not be a guarantor of workplace safety, and isn't necessarily the gatekeeper on this. But you can ask, you can require. There are lots of things you can do in this regard from a legal standpoint.
Yeah. So Mark, this is not COVID related, but more related to a bill in Congress around the ProAct. And what impact, the question is, what impact do you think this will have on employers if it passed? And how would you be advising your clients?
That's a great question. And let me get back to you on that.
Okay.
Because there's so much moving through Congress these days and through the state houses, it's hard to keep track of it all. So I'll get back to you with that privately.
Yeah, and this has to do with legislation that would make it unfair labor practice to require or coerce employees to attend employer meetings designed to discourage union membership. So certainly that's an issue for employers. And Irina, I don't know if you would be dealing with this.
I guess I can speak to that in a general sense, Tim, and that is to say that the dynamic has changed completely. Irina was talking about how work from home has changed. And it's important to point out we've gone from not work from home, but work at home during a pandemic to work from home. And this is a shift. And the same is true for labor relations. Yep. There's a shift going on. And what form that will ultimately take is a great question, and will play out over the next several months, because the dynamic between employer and employee has changed, not just working from home versus on site, but also the dynamic in terms of the power of unions and the dynamic in terms of minimum wage laws and so on.